For this demonstration, we're going to be looking at effective weighing and measuring. It's so important to make sure that you do this properly, to make sure that your recipes have the correct ratio of ingredients so that you don't end up with either soggy pastry or a dry cake or anything like that. So it's really important to make sure you weigh it out properly. So I'm going to show you two ways that we can do this with weighing. We're going to look at digital scales and we're going to look at manual scales as well. There are other types that you can use. Sometimes you can actually weight them, but they're a little bit more sort of old-fashioned now. We don't tend to use those as much. So we're going to start off with our manual one, which is here. You can see here we've got a dial around the outside, and what we can actually do is we can turn our dial to a correct number. So we always want to make sure that that red dial that you can see is starting at 0. So when we're measuring, it's important to try and do it in grams and kilograms, because that's the unit that we normally use. So we don't tend to use pounds and ounces anymore. So always make sure your little red line is starting on the 0. So what we're going to do is whenever we're weighing anything out, you don't put the raw ingredients, so for example your flour or your sugar, directly onto the weighing scales. You always put it into a bowl first. So I take my bowl and I pop it onto my weighing scales, and now I'm ready to start measuring. But this is where a lot of people go wrong. Can you see that our red dial has moved from 0 and it's actually now on just over 500 grams. So it's on about 520 grams at the moment, which would give us a false reading. So what we need to do is we now need to set this back to 0. So using the dial on the outside, I'm just going to shuffle this around to get it back to 0. So we can now see that the red line is on the 0. So we've zeroed it. So what we can do now is if we're weighing out 150 grams, I could then tip in whatever it is I'm weighing out. So in this case I'm using flour, and I'm looking for 150 grams. Now on the side here we can see that not all of the numbers are measured. So we can see it starts off at 200, 400, 600, it goes up to 1 kilogram, all the way around the dial, all the way up to 9 kilograms. So with 150, what we're going to have to do is look at the line in the middle, which is 100, and then half that again. So that's about 130. We're almost there. There's our 150. So what we're looking at now is we're looking at the lines here. So we've got the large line there, which is showing us 100 grams. This other large line actually has 200 written on it, so we know it's sort of halfway between those two lines. So we've only got 3 lines in the middle, so we know it lands on that third line. Now another way that you can do this is you can use a digital scale like this one. This one is actually much more accurate because it does all of the measuring for you. First thing you need to do is obviously make sure it's switched on. You can see mine is, because it started off with the 0. It's also really important to make sure that where it says unit, that you've got it on grams, because if you press that, you see it goes to pounds and ounces, which we don't want. If you're using an old cookbook, then it might be that you need the pounds and ounces recipe, or you can do a conversion. So we're going to pop that onto where it says grams. So you'll see a little G appear just over here. I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to put my bowl on top, and you can see that it now weighs 232 grams. So we want to make sure that we zero this. So again, we're going to press our 0 button and wait for it to go back to 0. So again, when we're doing our 150 grams, look at the dial as we start to put in our ingredients. So again, I'm using flour again. Now this is a much easier way of doing it because you can see it's really, really precise. If I told you to weigh out 98 grams in this one, you'd really struggle to get it accurate. Okay, if you put too much in, you can see it's up to 153 now. You can just scoop a little bit out and just gently add in what you need. So we've got our 2 different weighing scales measuring out exactly the same amount of ingredients. Now, what you can't do is you can't then say, right, okay, I'm going to take this off the weighing scales. Now they're all going to go into minus figures now, and then swap them over like that, because this one is now going to give you a false reading. If you'll just move the bowl out of the way, can you see it's now saying 464, and that's because it's weighing the bowl as well as the flour. So you can't swap them over once you've measured them. You have to always make sure that you zero them. So that's the most effective way to weigh out your ingredients. If you have got a manual scale, absolutely fine to use. But if you need really accurate numbers, the best one to use is an electronic one like this. The next item I'm going to show you with weighing and measuring is our measuring spoons. These are really, really popular in people's kitchens now because they're a really effective way to accurately measure out amounts either in grams or in millilitres. So if we look at our spoons on here, we've got 1 TBS, which stands for 1 tablespoon. So in your household, you'll probably find you've got lots of larger spoons and you don't necessarily know which one is a tablespoon. You might get a tablespoon and a soup spoon mixed up. So this is a really accurate way of doing it. Also as well, it tells you the amount. So this is actually 15 millilitres. Now if you were to use a measuring jug, which looks like this, which has got the measurements down the side of it, you'd really, really struggle to be able to measure out 15 millilitres because most measuring jugs don't start until 100 millilitres, which is down here. You can buy the very, very small measuring jugs, which you can do with smaller volumes, but this is just a really quick and easy way of doing it. So if I was to get, I've got a bowl of coloured water here so we can see it a bit easier. Just scoop that in there like that. Can you see that it's not quite full? So we know that that's not a full amount. By lifting that up, you can see you've got a nice level amount in there. So you might be asked for 1 tablespoon of lemon juice or 1 tablespoon of milk in a recipe. But also as well, these can be used for dry ingredients. So again, as we're looking through them, we've got half a tablespoon, which would be 7.5 millilitres. The TSP stands for 1 teaspoon. And now again, you might have different sized teaspoons in your house. You might have some that are bigger than others or smaller. Again, this is another way that you can measure it. Whenever you're measuring out a dry ingredient, so like flour or sugar, it's really important to make sure it's level, that it's not heaped. We've also got half a teaspoon here, which would be equivalent of 2.5 millilitres, and then 1/4 of a teaspoon. So if you're measuring out herbs and spices, it might ask for 1/4 of a teaspoon of chili or chili powder, and this is the best way to do it. So as you're looking at them like that, you can see that you want a level surface. You want it to be level with the top, you don't want it to be lower, and you don't want it to be higher. So they're a really good thing to have. If you see any that are called cups, cups are an American measuring system, so it's different to ours. A lot of recipes that you find online use cups, but you can again do conversions with them. But these are what we use in the UK. Okay, so moving on to our measuring now. So we've looked at weighing, we've looked at our measuring spoons as well. We're now going to have a look at how we're going to measure out our liquids. So on the side of your measuring jug, you might be able to see it a little bit clearer on this one. I put my hand in there, you can see it. You can see we've got numbers running down the side here. So these, again, we measure these in millilitres, so litres and millilitres. Most measuring jugs, larger ones, as I said before, start at 100 millilitres. So if you need to measure anything lower than that, you are going to need to get yourself a much smaller one of these. They're normally about the size of an egg cup, and you can measure much smaller quantities. Now for this, I'm going to be using a coloured bit of food colouring in some water, and this is just to help you see it on the side of the jug. Now obviously I'm not going to be able to turn the jug over whilst there's liquid in there, as it's going to spill everywhere. But I'm just going to show you what most people do when they're measuring things out. So they might ask for 150 millilitres of water in a recipe. What most people would do would pop their jug underneath a tap and start to fill it up, and then they tip their jug over to go, okay, is that the right amount? And they look down the side and they go, no, that's not enough. And that's because they've not got it on a flat surface. If you tip it the right way up, then it would be a lot more in there. So I'm going to show you how to do this properly. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that our measuring jug is on a flat surface. So if you are measuring water from your tap, for example, fill it up and you can put it on a flat surface afterwards. Or if you've got 2 jugs, fill one up with water and then put the accurate amount in the other one. So I've got this on a nice flat surface now, and what I'm going to do is I've put a tea towel down underneath just because I might spill some water because I'm not doing this in the tap. I'm going to start to pour in my liquid. Now again, I've chosen this coloured food colouring just so that you can see a little bit more clearly what we're looking for on here. So by putting those 3 ladles or 2 ladles in, I've actually gone up to 300 millilitres. So you can look for the line next to where 300 is here. And if we wanted to measure out 150, we can see that that's way too much. So we can tip a little bit back in again. Pop it flat. Now you can see that by moving it, the water is starting to wobble. Again, this isn't going to give you an accurate amount. So So we need to make sure that it's completely settled before we look again. Now we can see that there's still too much in there. So what I would do, tip some out, pop it flat on the table, and then I might get myself a second measuring jug, or just anything that you can hold water. Pop some in there. So what I can do is have a look, and I can see that I'm now underneath 100 millilitres. So what I'm going to do is, using the second jug, you're going to get your head right down to the level of the jug, and you're just going to watch at eye level where that needs to be. So you can see when you're measuring out really small quantities like 150 millilitres, it gets much easier the higher it goes. What you can do is get right down on there and see that it's between 100 and 200. That's your little marker there that you're looking for, so that's exactly the right amount. Now you might say, what's the point in being so accurate? Again, we talked about this earlier when we're weighing things. If you don't measure out ingredients properly, especially in things like baking, then you will end up with incorrect ratios, which is going to leave you with kind of soggy food or dry food or food that just doesn't taste very nice. So it's really important to make sure that you do measure things out properly. So if you can't see, you can see on this one, this is just quite a cheap plastic measuring jug. Some of the more expensive ones, they've actually got the lines in red. So Pyrex ones, I know they come in red and glass, which make them a little bit easier to see. I'm not suggesting you colour all of your food blue so that you can see it, but again, it's just an easy visual to be able to see on this video.